The room was full of power, gold pins, polished shoes, flags arranged like trophies. The African Union Summit in Addis Ababa had drawn presidents, prime ministers, and policymakers from across the continent. Everyone had come with something to say, but only one man came with something to remind. Ibrahim Traoré. He stood slowly from his seat, notes in hand, but not to read them. He placed them gently on the podium, looked out over the room, and began to speak. Not like a diplomat, but like a man who had run barefoot through his country's dirt, carrying the weight of forgotten revolutions on his back. No theatrics, no slogans, just truth. As he spoke, silence settled over the chamber. Ministers leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Interpreters paused between translations to process what they were hearing. He wasn't attacking, he wasn't blaming, but what he said cut deeper than accusation. And when he finished, there was no scripted applause, just stillness. Then, slowly, one delegate stood, then another, then 10, then nearly the whole room. They weren't clapping for style. They were standing for something older. Truth, memory, courage. But in the second row, a single man remained in his seat, arms folded, eyes low. He didn't blink. He didn't rise. He just sat there. And in doing so, he told the entire continent who he really was. On paper, the African Union Summit was about progress, Pan-African unity, regional security, trade agreements. But inside the marble halls, everyone knew better. The summit had become a stage where masks smiled and handshakes hid knives. Behind every diplomatic embrace was a contract. Behind every shared vision was a foreign investor. Leaders wore tailored suits stitched with loans. Security teams drank imported coffee in the halls while entire villages back home couldn't access clean water. Traoré saw it clearly. He watched them arrive in armored convoys, escorted by men trained in Paris and Washington. Watched as they praised sovereignty, and then signed away their soil behind closed doors. Some called it diplomacy. He called it surrender with a smile. So when it was announced that he would speak, many assumed it would be brief, symbolic, contained. But Traoré didn't come to be symbolic. He came to tear the script in half. In the hours before his address, a few nervous whispers passed through the hallways. Will he call us out? Will he name names? Will he say what we're all pretending not to know? He wouldn't need to, because sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do in a room full of masks is take his off. Traoré stepped up to the podium, slowly, deliberately, like he wasn't there to speak to a room full of leaders, but to a room full of mirrors. He glanced at his prepared remarks, then set them aside. His voice was calm, controlled, but every word felt like a hammer striking the hollow wood beneath their feet. My brothers, my sisters, we have learned to dance in chains. The room held its breath. We perform sovereignty while foreign drones fly over our skies. We deliver speeches about unity while signing deals in private that divide our futures. Some smiled politely, others shifted uncomfortably. Traoré wasn't accusing anyone, he was describing everyone. They have taught us how to applaud ourselves in their language, while forgetting the sound of our own. A few delegates began to whisper. Translation headsets crackled. A Tunisian minister removed his earpiece. A South African journalist stopped typing. Because they weren't listening to a political speech anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. Traoré's voice never rose. He didn't need to shout, because what he said next hit harder than any volume could deliver. When Sankara spoke, they silenced him with bullets. Today, they silence us with applause. No one moved, and for the first time in the entire summit, the performance stopped. Midway through the speech, the air changed. What began as historical reflection turned sharp, surgical. Traoré paused, let the silence breathe, then asked a question no one was prepared to answer. If tomorrow, every foreign army, every foreign loan, every foreign aid package disappeared, would we still know how to stand? Murmurs rippled across the chamber. He didn't accuse, he didn't name nations. But the question landed like a stone in still water. He continued. When the colonizers left our shores, they did not leave our minds. We replaced their flags with our own, but kept their blueprints. We chant independence in public and sign dependency in private. A minister from a former French colony clenched his jaw. A delegate lowered his head. They weren't reacting to a political jab. They were reacting to exposure. "I do not question our intelligence," Traoré said. "I question our allegiance. Do we serve our people or their creditors? Do we lead our countries or manage them on behalf of those who fund our silence?" His words didn't echo. They sank. Deep. He wasn't speaking to a room. He was speaking to their reflections. And as some stared at their shoes, others looked at him, no longer seeing a young president from Burkina Faso, but the return of a voice they thought had died with Sankara. For a moment, after Traoré's final words fell into silence, the room sat still. No music, no moderator, no forced clapping, just silence and the weight of truth. Then, quietly, a delegate from Namibia rose to his feet. No sound, no motion, just a man standing. A heartbeat later, a woman from Senegal followed. Then Kenya, then Chad, then Ethiopia. They weren't applauding yet. They were rising, not for performance, not for protocol, for presence. It wasn't coordinated, it wasn't expected, it was honest. Then came the sound, faint at first, like rain before the storm. A few palms meeting, then more. By the time the applause filled the room, almost every delegate was on their feet. Some stood with tears in their eyes. Others stood because they realized they hadn't, in years, heard someone speak without a leash. It was no longer a speech. It was a moment. And in that moment, for a flicker in African history, unity felt real, but not everyone stood. Because 2 rows back, one man remained still, back straight, arms folded, a head of state. He didn't rise, didn't clap, didn't even look up. And in a room where everyone else had finally remembered their posture, his silence said the most. All it took was a glance. In a sea of standing figures, shoulders squared, hands clapping, eyes lit with something dangerously close to belief, one man stayed seated. The cameras caught it. So did the crowd. He sat frozen, eyes locked on the edge of the desk in front of him, jaw clenched. His nation's flag shimmered behind him, but his body language told a deeper story, not of discomfort, of calculation. He wasn't unsure. He was choosing. And by staying seated, he answered Traoré's question louder than any microphone ever could. Who do we really serve? He didn't rise because rising would have meant alignment. It would have meant acknowledgement. It would have meant letting go of the comfortable silence that had bought him years of foreign favors, easy contracts, and quiet submission. He didn't rise because his allegiance was already spoken for. Everyone saw him. They didn't say his name. They didn't need to. One delegate turned and watched him with narrowed eyes. Another shook his head slowly. Because in that moment, surrounded by standing leaders and ringing applause, his refusal to stand became a confession, a silent betrayal. And without a single word, he revealed the truth. He wasn't leading his people. He was managing a contract. The clip hit the internet before the summit had even ended. A 12-second video. Traoré finishes his speech. Leaders rise one by one. Applause thunders. And then a slow zoom on the one man still seated. No words, no commentary, just silence. And that still image. The world reacted instantly. On African Twitter, the captions wrote themselves, "This is what betrayal looks like." We finally saw who claps for us and who doesn't. One man chose his seat over his people. In Pan-African newsrooms, analysts debated it for days. He had a chance to stand with history, and he stayed seated with his masters. Others tried to defend him. Maybe he was unwell. But one anchor from Lagos cut through it all with a single line. "You don't need legs to stand with dignity. You need courage." In France, the clip was more unsettling. Advisors to the foreign ministry recognized the man. So did their intelligence teams. He had been a reliable partner. Now he was a symbol of the very strings Traoré had warned about. One official reportedly said, "He wasn't exposed by Traoré. He was exposed by his own spine." And in classrooms across Africa, students were shown the clip. Not to mock, not to shame, but to remember that in a single moment, without a single name spoken, truth stood tall and silence sat guilty. The press circled like vultures. Dozens of microphones lined up outside the presidential suite. Journalists from Nairobi to Paris shouted questions. President Traoré, do you have a message for the leader who didn't stand? Was this a political stunt? Are you accusing him of betrayal? Traoré walked past them all. No statement, no tweet, no press release. He boarded his flight back to Ouagadougou as if nothing had happened, because in his eyes, everything had already been said. At home, his staff offered to release a follow-up. We can clarify the message. We can name what others are afraid to. But Traoré declined. He simply said, "Sometimes the most powerful moment is not the speech. It's watching who doesn't move when the truth walks in." Then he returned to work, reviewing agricultural proposals, signing school reforms, holding untelevised town hall meetings. He didn't chase the moment, because he wasn't interested in winning the internet. He was interested in finishing what Sankara started, and while others scrambled to justify their silence, he let the world sit with it. Because real power doesn't argue. It walks away and lets the echo do the rest. Months passed. The summit faded from international headlines, but not from memory. Especially not in the country of the man who stayed seated. His people had seen the clip, they had heard the speech, and most importantly, they had watched their leader do nothing. The silence that once protected him now betrayed him. Protests followed. Small at first, then louder. Youth groups began quoting Traoré's words. Old revolutionaries came out of retirement to remind the people what dignity used to look like. And finally, on a quiet Friday afternoon, he was voted out. No riot, no drama, just a chair left empty by a man who couldn't stand when it mattered most. Weeks later, a new president was sworn in. Young, grounded, determined. In her first act of office, she entered the same summit hall where it all happened. She brought nothing with her but a small wooden frame. Inside it, just a quote, carved in gold, "We rise not to applaud. We rise to belong." Ibrahim Traoré. She placed it on the empty chair where the man had once sat, a chair no one dared fill that day, because now that seat had a memory, and memory, once awakened, never forgets. History doesn't remember how loud your applause was. It remembers whether you stood at all. In a world of calculated diplomacy and performative politics, Ibrahim Traoré did something rare. He didn't name names. He didn't shame. He simply told the truth. And in doing so, he gave every leader in that room a choice, to rise or be revealed. One man stayed seated, and without a word, without a finger pointed or a name spoken, he exposed himself to the world. Because character is never tested when it's easy to stand. It's tested when the world is watching, and you choose not to. If this story moved you, if you believe silence can reveal more than any speech, and that real leadership is shown in the moments no one prepares for, comment, "I will rise." Like this video to honor the ones who stand with dignity, especially when it's difficult. Subscribe to Honor Restored for more cinematic stories of quiet rebellion, unapologetic truth,